Hi, everyone. Apologies for coming in late. I think the time change really threw my meticulously planned evening off. But I'm here and I just regret missing out on the previous presentations. Um, so today I'll just talk very briefly about my recent experience doing remote assessment for for an agriculture-focused program in Uganda, which had a significant kind of market systems component to it. And the assignment was to do an end of program impact assessment to look at the impact of the impact of the program's interventions on the beneficiaries, but also on anything that's happening in the market system that's surrounding those particular focus market systems that they were working in. And as part of the research design, it involved talking to several categories of people, from of course, program staff, but also program partners, other stakeholders, and of course some beneficiaries in the field. And for that, we used a variety of tools, but I think I'll just focus on one today, just so that we can spend a bit of time, perhaps, to unpack that. Just as a context, also, like where we worked, the project we are working on is operating in the eastern and southwestern parts of Uganda, where internet connectivity and telecommunications was good at certain towns, but beyond that, where majority of the beneficiaries were, the internet connectivity was not so good. It was quite patchy. So we actually had to do quite a bit of, as part of our kind of approach, we also had made sure that we had an internet dongle for every single internet service provider that was available in the country, just so that we could, we could always stay online and be connected. So anyways, I'll focus on this approach we used for our key informant interviews, as well as interviewing some of these partners in their places of business. And like as Nobunita had mentioned, we had taken a hybrid approach to it. This assessment was done by one team which had two components. So there was myself and a colleague who was based outside of Uganda, but we were supported by two people who were in the country, and they were our counterparts in the country who helped us with facilitating meetings and the logistics of it. And for doing remote assessments, I'm sure it's been discussed, the logistics are quite important and quite complicated. You really need to cover off every base. So they helped us do that. They also helped us, well, they carried us around in their laptops, but they also provided us, they were our eyes and ears on the ground to give us a bit of an idea about the context that we were kind of interviewing these people in. They were sending us regular videos and photos to make sure that we kind of understood where we were talking, the partners we were meeting, their places of business, etc. Now, for talking to these key informants, which were partners or local government officials, or just other groups of people that were related to this intervention or somehow benefiting from this, what we did was we would call in. So myself and my colleague who were outside of Uganda, we would call in on a Zoom link on the which was on the laptop of our Ugandan teammate, and she would essentially go from meeting to meeting or from location to location, and we would just call into her laptop, and then she would be then, I guess, putting us literally on the table in surrounded by our key informants, and she would I guess do the introductions, and then explain the process, and then we would then start having those conversations through these Zoom links. And it was quite useful because, I mean, first, it's in the context that we were working in, it would have been incredibly difficult to get these people online, or even just approach them as part of a cold call campaign, let's say. So it was important to have somebody who could go to these locations, sometimes to very small, like micro enterprises, introduce themselves, introduce the study, and then of course introduce the faces in the laptop, and that really paved the way for a much more normal conversation than I would have expected when I started that study. It was also so that was one thing, like that easing into the conversation that really helped to have have that team on the ground. The second thing was, of course, as I mentioned, technology was a bit of a challenge, but we tried to minimize that challenge by just calling into our teammates' laptop through connections that we would test, let's say, before every interview. So that way we were not, how shall I say, like we didn't really, we had a bit of a known quantity as opposed to trying to test out new ways of reaching our participants or our respondents through their own devices. The third part was, there were a lot of rural enterprises that we spoke to, and some of them were not as savvy with Zoom or other communications software as let's say we were, of course. And so that really helped, that we had somebody go to their places of business and set up the call. So for them, it was not, that challenge was removed. So it was much more, everything was set up, and we were then able to have a conversation just going forward. So these are some of the things that that kind of worked out for us. What in terms of what didn't work out, there were a couple of things that I thought was a bit difficult for us. Firstly, having focus group discussions, particularly with, like, let's say female respondents or female beneficiaries. It was very difficult for us to do it remotely. So we actually had to abandon the plan. We couldn't join in because it was an interruption. It was very difficult to follow all those conversations that were, sometimes they would happen simultaneously. So what we ended up doing was we ended up having additional sessions with our Ugandan team to, like, really develop the FGD questions and agenda together, do practice runs, and get them to a point where they were able to then run these focus group discussions. And we would, of course, have debriefs at the end of every day, so that for every subsequent focus group discussions, we could come back with feedback on questions, on asking styles, on requests to dig deeper, etc., etc. I suppose the other thing from sorry, there's a question about female FGDs, but also just, I suppose, in general with FGDs, but for women respondents, the feedback we got was that it was not comfortable for them. Like, they were not comfortable in that setup to share openly or share share what they had on mind, and that was why I guess I had mentioned the female FGD part. The other part that really didn't, we thought was a limitation of the remote assessments was that, coming in, we were not we were external assessors, and for us, we really missed out on fully appreciating the context that we were, I guess, that we were supposed to explore as part of this assessment. Having a local presence really helped. Having those videos and photos and their observations really helped, but it's still, like, there were still some gaps. Like, it was very it was, it fell far short of what you would actually get, that immersive experience you would get if you were doing that kind of an exercise in person. And I think that has implications on what remote assessments or remote research, etc. That has an implication on what these tools can be used for. So I think, for example, it might be effective for assessments, but it might not be as effective for design, program design, or let's say strategy development, etc. Because that understanding of context is really, really important. And then the last part, and this is not necessarily, it's not to do with these hybrid approach that we took to these interviews, but we did have a small component of doing short surveys or conducting short surveys with some of these beneficiaries that were of these interventions. And I think the previous presentation you mentioned, and I fully agree that the size and that being aware of the time, that really was important for us to get good responses. But what we didn't do as well was our response rate from female respondents were much lower than from male respondents. When we did make these phone calls, the phones were either turned off or they were not picked up. And this was at a much higher rate than we saw with our male respondents. And this does, we were not able to dig deeper into this as to why that has happened. And this is something that we had asked the program that we were advising to look into. but there is some there's some literature available which talks about cell phone usage habits, or just the impact of or other norms and perceptions that may have an impact on the way women, let's say, respond to, I suppose, unknown numbers and such. So, that's something that if you have any advice, I would be very happy to kind of pick that up from you guys to see what I can do better next time.